Welcome back, minors. My name's Amber Johnston, and I'm a counselor here at Student Wellbeing.
And my name's Tracy Kriegel, and I'm a counselor here at Student Wellbeing. It's time for your morning cup of joe.
So this week I want to talk about individual identity and how it can tie into our mental health, especially for those who are living in another culture or who are separated from their culture for some reason from our typical cultural practices. So as usual, we're referencing the show. This time it's The Mandalorian, but we're going to do our best to avoid the big spoilers. So I might be talking about some of the characters and their individual motivations, but I'm not going to talk about anything that happens to these characters.
Thank you for not doing that, Amber. Don't want to give away everything, so people can still watch it, right?
So The Mandalorian is a show that at its heart is based around the cultural identity of a particular people in the Star Wars universe.
Yay, Star Wars.
Woohoo! So I'm a massive Star Wars fan.
Yep, love Star Wars.
And in the Star Wars movies, we were briefly introduced to a father and son. First, we were introduced in the original trilogy to Boba Fett, and eventually in the prequels, we were introduced to his father, Jango Fett, and they were bounty hunters. And we found out that those bounty hunters were from a race called Mandalorians. The characters themselves are fan favorites, and even though they're considered quote, quote, bad guys, they're just plain cool. I mean, there's just something fascinating about a guy that walks around with a cool helmet and a backpack with jets on it. So they have head-to-toe armor, and again, the backpacks with jets, and not to mention all kinds of cool weapons like flamethrowers and missiles, and each Mandalorian has different weapons. In the movies, we learn that Jango was adopted, referred to as a foundling, and in Mandalorian culture, that he was raised his son or / clone, because Boba is actually a clone of Jango. In the Mandalorian culture, on another planet, before he was killed. So, kind of going back, what is a Mandalorian? Well, that's kind of complicated. At its core, a Mandalorian is a race, a culture, and a religion. It's kind of all three. So, and more than that, it's an identity. So we see a variety of characters that identify as Mandalorian, and each has a different idea of what that means to them and how they express it and how they live their lives. It's kind of the basis of what this podcast is about. So they each also additionally have identities outside of being just a Mandalorian that help shape their perspective. And each one identifies as a different part as being the most important part of being a Mandalorian. So how can that be? If they all identify as Mandalorian, then wouldn't it make sense for it to be all the same? Well, that's not the case. For Boba and Jango, it seems that the bounty hunting and individualism is the most important part, while Din Djarin, who is the big character, the Mandalorian, for him, it's the rituals and the rules. And for Bo-Katan, who is another character who is kind of their leader, and she was the leader before the planet of Mandalore was destroyed, and their civilization was destroyed. And she values the history and the traditional values of the Mandalorian culture. So, and the list kind of goes on, but in addition, each person also has their own identities, such as man, woman, father, etc., so on and so forth, on top of their identity as a Mandalorian. So
to make it a little easier, let's focus on Din Djarin. First, he identifies as a foundling. He was not born, but was adopted into the Mandalorian culture. As such, as you can see him being very strict about his cultural beliefs, much stricter than several individuals that are born into it. As said before, he's very attached to the rituals and rules of the Mandalorian culture. So Din Djarin also identifies as a bounty hunter. So that's basically his role, right?
It's his job.
So this is his job, and it makes up a great deal of his identity at the beginning of the show. He tries to remain emotionally removed from his job and focuses on just doing what needs to be done, but he can't. Why can't he? Because his bounty is an adorable baby. In this case, the intersection between his identity of himself as a Mandalorian and a foundling and his identity as a bounty hunter, they conflict. Well, that'd be hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the Mandalorian belief system is that foundlings should be protected and raised in the Mandalorian culture. Whereas you turn around and his beliefs as a bounty hunter is that I'm supposed to complete the bounty. That's part of my reputation. That's what gets me my money. That gets me my, this is part of my job here.
Right.
And now we find these in the very first episode. Boom, they're at odds.
Right. So his identity as a foundling has sympathy for another orphan who's lost and needs help. So lots of compassion, lots of sympathy. So his cultural belief, as we learn from the armorer character, is that they should always take in foundlings and teach them the ways of the Mandalore. However, doing so violates his bounty contract. We see him struggle through the first season with his sense of duty as a bounty hunter and his sense of duty as a Mandalorian. Wow. That's kind of putting his whole sense of self at odds, isn't it?
Yeah, it's these two identities that are at odds with each other. So we call this the intersection of identities, and we all have multiple identities. We might identify as a college student and at S&T, a son, a daughter, a member of a certain culture like Din Djarin is. We might even have certain religious beliefs, gender identities, or sexual orientations. And all of these together form a picture of who we are. And we might identify ourselves as a pet owner or a book lover or even a Star Wars fan. However, at the root, we have a few main identities that form the core of who we are and our beliefs. And usually out of all of our things out of our control, these are things that just are. And things we're born into, and that we were assigned to them outside of our control. And usually one of them is our gender identity, but it also can include our race or our culture. And we can also see that for Din Djarin, Mandalorian is one of those identities, and it's influenced how he's acted.
Gotcha. So according to the psychologist Erik Erikson and his theory of psychosocial development, when we're in adolescence, we start to question who we really are. We start exploring different roles and putting together a picture of who we are as a person between the ages of 12 and 18. It forms our internal idea of the self that follows us through our lives. Our self-identity gives us confidence and helps us find our path in the world. We bond with others based on our self-identity. We make major life decisions and structure our lives around the internal concept of self. And that's how important this is.
Right. It's the lens through which we see the world. Right. It's how we interpret things that happened to us and around us, because it's like a window. It's how we interpret our environment.
Gotcha.
And when we have more than one of these pieces of our identity challenged, or it's in conflict, like we have one piece like Din Djarin does that conflicts with another piece, it can lead to what we call an identity crisis, and which can severely affect our mental health. The closer the identity is to one of those primary identities, the greater impact it can have on our mental health and wellness. So if part of my identity is that I'm a good student and that I go to college and I struggle to get good grades, it could create a feeling of being uncomfortable for me. Because now it's challenged at the core of how I see myself. So getting a bad grade can make me start to question who I really am. If I'm not a good student, then who am I? Like what is a good student? What we start looking at these things. And even though on the outside I appear to be the same person I was yesterday, inside I'm struggling, and I can feel this intense feeling of anxiety.
Right. I've heard students say, I have to get A's to be a good person.
Right.
And I've based my identity around always achieving success.
Right. Yeah, and so now getting a B totally shakes my world.
Right. And it's hard because they've always equated achieving A's and success with who they are.
Yes.
Yeah, as a person. Yeah.
So another common one is when there's conflict between the cultural norms of the country we've lived in for a prolonged period of time and the culture that we identify with. So maybe you've lived in the United States for a very long time now, but the culture you're originally from is a different country. And there might be conflicting things about those two cultures. And then we can start to develop habits over time for the culture we've been part of that's new and that we didn't intend to adopt. Like it just becomes, because we've been immersed in it for so long, we start to pick up these habits. And that can cause us a feeling of internal conflict and can cause conflict with family members as well. And that can be extremely frustrating.
Right, understandable. So as a result of these feelings, might start to feel intense feelings of self-doubt and even experience symptoms of depression like a decrease in mood, loss of interest in things I usually like to do, fatigue, and moodiness. I might feel I'm betraying one identity by holding another, and I might also start to question who I am or who I want to be. Mm-hmm. Basically, the whole framework that tells us who I am and where I belong can come into question, and I might feel very lost. I might lose my confidence in myself and my abilities and have a hard time making decisions about things.
Right. Might feel like there's no right way to do things, and it might feel like there's no answer because no matter what, I'm betraying one of my identities.
Right. Yeah.
So people tend to experience an identity crisis at certain points in their life, particularly at points of great change that include like the beginning or ending of a relationship, especially if it's been somebody you've been in a relationship for a long time, like childhood sweethearts and things. We can start to developing being part of that relationship as part of our identity, especially if it's in that 12 to 18 window. We experiencing a traumatic event. So you'll start when somebody goes through something that's super traumatic, you'll start seeing them picking up being a survivor of that event as part of their identity. Having a child, that's a big identity. Is being a parent is a big identity for a lot of people. Learning about a health condition, whether that be chronic or something, usually something long lasting. Losing a loved one, losing or starting a job, starting or ending college or graduate school, and moving to a new place, especially if we're moving to a place that's vastly different than the area that we started in.
Yeah, I can add to your list here, having a baby.
Yes.
Getting married.
Yes.
Those are some big ones too, if I had to add those to that list, because those are some things that are maybe quite a ways out there,
right,
for some of our, students now. But I've also seen that some people, even when they're in college, they start families. Mm-hmm. They get married. Right. They do start their families when they're in college. So they may not be too far out there for people. So those are some things that actually do change for people as well. So things to be thinking about too that change, your identity, because you evolve around, now I'm not only just a college student, I'm also a wife and a student, and then I'm a mom, and then I'm also a daughter and,
homeowner,
so becoming a homeowner, I'm a car owner, getting a car, your first car.
Yes.
So these are all things that are challenging things for you. So, yeah.
Well, in some identities, like car owner, that's going to be a smaller one, whereas like parent, that's a huge piece of identity right there. So see what I'm talking about, how they're different sizes and hold different pieces with them. Yeah. So identity as a son or a daughter might be far more important and encompassing, especially in cultures that have high responsibilities and expectations for children towards their parents. Right, exactly. And that those are pieces, they're all pieces of the puzzle of who we are.
Right. Yeah. So if you're gonna have a baby, start with a pet first. Learn how to take care of a dog, and then move on up the window. Can't always work that way, but
So what do I do if I start feeling like this way, that I start having a conflict between various identities? I would highly suggest finding somebody you can talk to. That can be a friend or a mentor, but it can also be a therapist.
Right.
These identity crises, they are not a small matter.
No.
Like these, sometimes we have to work out because we've got very strong core beliefs that we have to try, that are conflicting, that we have to try to work together and try to figure out. Your feelings are valid, and having someone to talk to about them can help you process those feelings and come to a place where you feel more comfortable. And you can also use this as a chance to look at the person you want to be and where you want to be in life and set the goals to get there. Because those identities each come with a picture of what your life looks like and what you want it to look like. And it's also a chance to look at your life in a more nuanced way. Instead of just defining yourself as good or bad, maybe you recognize that you're overall a good student, but you struggle with lecture classes, or maybe you need more help in certain math classes. Overall, an identity crisis doesn't have to be something that takes your identity away or redefines it. It's just something to reassess and become more introspective. So it kind of brings a little bit more nuance instead of just like a total overhaul.
Right. Very good. I think it, taking on that perspective of, who I am, what I want to be, is a great way to just identify who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and realizing that identity isn't stagnant, that over time, the people and the things that we are around can help shape that, and understanding that it's not always going to be everything work together. Sometimes we're going to have things that kind of shake us to our core, where the two identities that we have might be in conflict. My identity as a parent may conflict with my identity as a daughter. Those kind of things. We never know. It just depends on what life throws at us.
I think we're always growing and we're always developing. But I think something I see that's important is who you are, who you're comfortable with is so important.
Yes.
And identifying that person that you are and want to be and loving you.
Yes.
Is so important, and embracing all those roles that you play, and celebrating that, I think is important, because there's so much, when you lay out those roles of all the things you do, I haven't seen The Mandalorian, but if you take that back to Din Djarin, I'm sure that he had to embrace that part of, his role of being, where he was in that role. So I think that's that piece that we as human beings have to enroll all of our roles in life that we play, and the more that we love ourselves for who we are, the more contentment we get in life. If we fight all those roles, the more instability we get. If you enjoy being a daughter, you enjoy being a son, you enjoy being who you are, embrace that role. If you're a wife, if you're a husband, whatever you are, whoever your partner is, embrace them. Embrace who you are. If you're an art teacher, if you're an engineer, do that with all your gusto. So.
Right. Well, thank you guys for joining us this week, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.
Take care.
For more information about mental health and wellness, contact Student Wellbeing at 204 Norwood Hall. And you can also give us a call at 573-341-4211.
The song Happy Days is brought to us by music from www.free-stock-music.com. You can also add and follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook using our handle @S&T Wellbeing.